title of the talk is It Just Can't Be This Simple. And I know Dale Houle, D. Jacob, and I are going to look with fevered interest on this one. So at this time, I'd like to present Ellen Abney, who's going to make the presentation, and Roger Caldwell.
My name is Alan Abney, and I'm the manufacturing manager at Valmont, Texas, in Brenham, Texas. We're located in Brenham, which is around 200 miles from here, in between Austin and Houston. And first of all, forgive me if I walk around a little bit. I have a high level of energy. We have 110 acres there in Brenham, and I've been guilty of, they told me when I first became a manager that managers aren't supposed to run. So from plant to plant, I've been known to run to those areas rather than get in a vehicle and drive. But I came to Valmont several years ago, fresh out of college, with a real nice fancy degree with a background in cost accounting. And when I came to Valmont, Mr. Jeff Wood, who was the general manager then, brought me in and gave me a copy of the goal and said, read the goal, it is required reading, and once you finish reading the book, we'll sit down and talk. So as I began reading the goal, I was very intrigued by the character Alex Rogo. And the more I read, the faster I saw my degree vanishing away. But after reading it, I can remember sitting in Mr. Wood's office, and he asked me one question. He said, what is the most important thing that you have learned from the goal? And I sat there in his office, and I thought about it, and I said, to be honest with you, throughput, inventory, and operating expense did not come to my mind. First thing that came to my mind is how I wasted 4 years of my life getting my degree. But let me tell you a little bit about Valmont. Valmont produces steel light structures for the utilities and construction markets. We have two basic products. Our small pole applications, which are for highway, street lighting, and traffic signal, and large pole structures for power line transmission, high mast lighting, cellular communication towers, and sports lighting. Prior to 1987, we utilized an MRP system to assist us in scheduling our shops. We launched orders for firm customer orders and for forecasted requirements. We also used daily summaries that provided total hours scheduled through the work centers to give us the ability to see the hours that are scheduled through the shop. Through controlled listings, we were able to predetermine and set batch quantities to minimize setups and to maximize efficiencies throughout the shop. Our BOM structure is fairly simple. Our routing files are based on and established by IE calculations. We have approximately 7,000 to 8,000 active part numbers and approximately 40 cost centers and a computerized inventory tracking system. Based on MRP, we scheduled all shipping level items with a finish date of Monday of the shipping week. MRP would then backward schedule the shop date. Due to batches starting by the week, we had a lot of hours starting at the end of the prior week. And we generated schedules trying to keep capacities level throughout the entire shop and still maintain predetermined levels of efficiencies and productivities on all the work centers. We paid real close attention to our fit-up and weld areas in the shop. We scheduled our fit-up and weld areas to total capacity. But we also kept in mind while we were scheduling these areas that we were scheduling firm customer orders and forecasted requirements. And although we had these systems in place, we experienced a lot of problems with MRP. First of all, we continually faced an enormous expediting task due to end-of-the-week starts. Priorities were set on orders with the least amount of shortages rather than on orders that were the latest in the shop. Our past due hours were growing continuously, and rescheduling became the norm rather than the exception. We were rescheduling every week. It was like a circus. Each week passed by, the same thing happened. So also, due to the predetermined batch sizes, large quantities of parts were moved from one machine to the other in the parts processing areas, which caused big queues to form in front of our machines. This created problems for us getting parts down to our fit-up areas so our welders could have something to work on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the following week due to this large amount of process time and these large batches on our machines. Fortunately, despite our problems, we were a member or part of a large corporation. However, in 1987, Mr. Jeff Wood gave a copy of the goal to his staff. He instructed us to read the goal, and once we read it, we were going to meet and discuss what our thoughts were on the goal. After we met, we all had the same thought, that the goal had to have been talking about Valmont, Texas. All the problems we were having, Alex was having the same problems. So we all concurred. It had to be talking about Valmont, Texas. But the first step that we thought, well, we need to find out if this can actually work for our company. But most importantly, will we have to eliminate our existing systems and start all over, or could we somehow interface the two? But we were afraid that if we made any change, that we'd shut down our shop. But we knew something had to happen because some change had to take place because we were experiencing too many problems. And after we went ahead and started developing TOC, implementing TOC in the shop, and we had to right off start a new mindset, develop a new mindset. We found out that setups, productivities, efficiencies, they didn't mean anything unless it was tied to the constraint. All lot sizes, EOQs, and minimums were reduced to 1-for-1, and we totally took forecasting out of the system. The lot sizes or minimums and EOQs, sometimes we just ignored them, but we only produced to the order. We found out after we did this that our process time was significantly shorter than our customer quoted lead times, which eliminated the need for finished goods inventory. The next step was to implement DBR, or drum buffer rope. The drum is the finite scheduling of the system's constraint, and the buffer is time protection for the constraint against any disruptions, and the rope is the releasing of raw material to the shop. We launched our orders in the constraint based on the start date. Then we allowed MRP to forward schedule the finish date. We scheduled our subordinate areas based on the finish date, and we allowed MRP to backward schedule the start date. And our biggest hurdle, we had to realize that it was okay for the machines, as long as it wasn't a constraint, to set idle. And it was very common to see workers in our subordinate areas painting equipment, if there were no buffer holes, painting equipment, doing preventative maintenance, even going to other areas and working on parts. We continue to measure the constraint based on traditional efficiencies, productivities, and performance to the schedule. And then we immediately implemented buffer management. Everything about our production process can be seen in this diagram. Our constraints, which is our 1495 large pole fit up and our small pole 139 fit up in weld areas. We have a fixed 6-day buffer in front of the constraint. And we began measuring our subordinate areas based on holes in the buffer. A buffer hole is any part or parts that are not in inventory the day required for the drum schedule. And we began measuring our subordinate areas by holes in the buffer. For our operation, Region 1 is day 1 and day 2 in front of the constraint. This means that all parts required for the constraint for today, which is day 1, and tomorrow, which is day 2, must be complete and in inventory by the beginning of the shift on day 1, which is today. And Region 1 must remain 100%. This means any holes in the buffer in Region 1 take top priority. If an employee in a subordinate area is working on a particular part and a Region 1 item is brought to him or her, if they have to break their setup to do that part, they must do it because it's required by the drum schedule. It must stay 100%. Takes top priority. Region 2 is day 3 and day 4 in front of the constraint. It should stay around 70–75% complete. We utilize Region 2 as a problem identification. We look at this area and we try to find cost centers where we have large amount of hours in the system or WIP that can possibly become Region 1 buffer holes. So we have a focus point to possibly eliminate future buffer holes in Region 1 on day 1 and day 2. Region 3 is day 5 and day 6 in front of the constraint and should remain approximately 25–30% complete. Region 3 is used as a day of acknowledgement for the work order, and the raw material along with the work order is released into the shop. We also have, here's our raw material, gateway machines, which are cutting operations. On the 5th and 6th day, the work order and the raw material is released in the shop for processing. Behind the constraint, we have our red lanes. Once product leaves the constraints, they enter into the red lanes, produced. Finishing is also part of our red lanes, and then, go into the finished goods ship buffer. We have a rework loop here. Once we thought that once product left the constraint that it would just continue going through the system. But we found out that there were items getting rejected for either bad quality weld or a fit-up error, whatever they may be, and they just get out there and sit on the floor. So we established this rework loop that whatever is rejected takes top priority because it's already consumed constraint time. So we get that item, pole, on the rollers and push it on through the system because it's not throughput until it gets ultimately to the customer. Our total system production lead time is 18 days. This is the longest leg of our system. 6 days in our subordinate areas. We have 3 days here of queue transfer time, 4 days in finishing, 5-day ship buffer, 18 days. We also, for our subordinate areas, established a CCR constraint analysis report. What this report tells us, we track all buffer holes in Region 1 every day. This provides some history for us of what cost centers are major Region 1 violators so that when we get to the point to where we want to elevate our constraint, we have somewhere to focus on some improvements. Once we implemented TOC, we found out if it was really going to work, we had to educate our shop employees. So we brought the shop employees in small groups, met with them, had discussions with them concerning TOC. We ran several simulations of the dice game as spoken in the race, excuse me. And we thought at first that we were going to get some negative feedback because quite naturally many people don't adjust well to change. But we got a lot of positive feedback that helped us proceed with implementing buffer management in our subordinate areas was key. We got the employees involved. We had to let them know that it's okay for you to pick up a broom and sweep your area if you have no buffer holes in your area. So we had to establish that mindset. We had to get them thinking in that realm. But once we implemented TOC, we saw significant improvements. We saw an immediate reduction in work in process. Small queues in front of our machines rather than big queues. Forecasting requirements began to disappear. The employees were actually going to other machines, other work centers, getting parts to work on. Rather than parts being pushed through the system through the MRP way, parts were actually being pulled through the system. The end of the month crunch vanished, and our shipments or throughput increased significantly. In 1986, our shipments were 8.5 million. Last year in 1996, our shipments were 46.5 million. So over that time period, we increased 10 times. It was astronomical. Since we've had some success with TOC, we asked ourselves the question, what's the next step? What is the process of ongoing improvements? And we found out that if we focus and base all of our business decisions on T, I, and OE, throughput, inventory, and operating expense, and continuously apply the 5 steps of TOC, we'll be successful. So what we do, what we've done over the years is before we elevate the constraint, it's our strategic constraint. 1495, large pole fit up, small pole, 139, fit up and weld. Before we tamper with elevating the constraint, we use our CCR buffer analysis to show us the number 1 and number 2 major region 1 buffer violators. We know that if we elevate the constraint, those region 1 major buffer violators are going to create some problems for us. So we use that report to find those areas. And we go to those areas and we see what can we do to make improvements there. It may be buying additional equipment. You're going to have to spend some OE. It may be additional manpower, process improvements, additional facilities. We find out how can we eliminate those areas from being major buffer violators. We also look behind the constraint and find out which cost center has chronically gave us problems after the product left the constraint. We apply the same logic. What can we do? In our base weld area 852, can we upgrade that equipment? Can we make them more productive by giving them better equipment? Do they need more space? Additional training? Once we've eliminated those buffer violators, we elevate our constraint. And we continually do that over, over again. So the answer to the question, can it be just that simple? Yes. That's exactly how we've been successful over the years. By, number 1, basing all of our decisions, our business decisions, on how they affect T, I, and OE, and applying the 5 steps of TOC over and over and over again. Do you have any questions?
In the last 11 years, has the market ever been your constraint?
No, sir.
You're lucky. Or maybe you're just good, and that's why. That's quite possible.
like
But
to
it
say
never
regarding-
has?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
They're not lucky at all. I'm sure that's true. They're smart, not lucky. Oh, yes, they are lucky, depending on what is the definition of luck. In my vocabulary, luck means opportunity meets preparation. Most people don't know to what extent they are lucky because they are not prepared. I do remember the letters and conversations that went between me and Jeff and Dave Cosio in 88 and 89. One was, whoops, the market is now the constraint, what do we do about it? The second one is, how can we continue on and on and on, making sure that the bottleneck will not move. Fellas, have you noticed something? Here is a company that's grown tenfold. Market is changing in 10 years. The bottleneck stayed in one place. But it's not a fluke. You heard this gentleman talking. How much are they careful to make sure that as they elevate, the constraint does not move? If they will not pay attention to those machines that create the holes in region 1 and they will touch the constraint, boom, the constraint move, the whole system has to be redone. Are you with me, yes or no? Such phenomenal stability can be done when you take care of it. It doesn't happen by itself. Yes, they've done tremendous things in terms of guiding their salespeople, to get more business and so on, based all on TIOE. Okay? The effort was not done just in production, it was done also in the sales force, guiding them how to get the beads and so on. And by the way, they have 18 days with what delivery on time?
92%.
92%. What is the standard in the industry? What is the lead time?
85 and 90.
Have you maintained your buffer at 6 days all the time in the last 11 years?
Yes.
Now let me answer. And my answer is, based on what he told you so far, it makes perfect sense to maintain this buffer, and you tell me why. You are a Jonah. And if you don't know, think again. He gave you enough information to show why the buffer should be maintained in the same 6 days throughout this time. Number one, is there any advantage for them to reduce the buffer in terms of getting more sales? No. Number two, they are constantly increasing volume. You heard from him. Tenfold. Okay? Fine. Eightfold. Okay? What happens whenever you increase volume? What should happen to the buffer? It should grow. Okay? That's why, instead of playing oscillations on something that doesn't matter anyhow, they're holding it safely in the 6 days. Very smart. They're a smart bunch. More questions?
I'm very curious to know, there has been many contentions from many people that if you allow people to be idle, the non-constrained resources in your plant, they must be idle a fair amount of time. It's been contended by some people that if you allow people to be idle for long periods of time, you take away the satisfaction on their jobs, that they become, they don't feel happy with their jobs.
They don't feel like they're contributing.
Yeah. Has that been your experience in your plant?
And for some, it was a challenge, convincing them that we're not going to fire you if you're over there painting your machine. No buffer holes is good. It's how you relay the message. You let them see what you're measuring them by. So we let them know you have no buffer holes. You've accomplished your task by eliminating the buffer holes. And then in region 2, he may have something sitting in front of him, then yes, he can work. But if there are no buffer holes and there are parts upstream waiting to come to his area, work on something, paint your machine, clean up. But we communicate with them effectively that they know if you have no buffer holes, you're doing a great job. And we let them see how we're measuring.
I had a question on, you talked about a rework area that does not go back through the constraint again?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
By the way, it wasn't like that when it started. They had to work on it. But this concept there, it's already past the constraint. It's worth a fortune. Let's save it and fast. And this mentality, don't you realize that all of it is so simple because they succeeded to change the mentality of the workforce and, of course, management?
To further add to that question, we had to do the same thing in the constraint. We had to let them know, you're not a prima donna because you're in a constraint. It is important that you realize that any downtime in your area is vital. You can't go down. And if for whatever reason you're losing time, we've got to find out why, because we're scheduling you 100%. And whatever problems that you're having, we want to hear from you. We want to talk. So even now, today, we're constantly communicating with our fitters in our 1495 areas and small pole 139 area. We want to know what's going on out there. Is it a mixed problem or what? So that we can maintain the performance of the constraint drum schedule.
Your constraint is the fitters. This is people or machines that are.
People.
So the constraint that you're guiding is basically something that you can upgrade by adding more trained people.
Yes,
Is that true?
it's easy for us to elevate our constraint. Well, if we may have to add additional stations for those people to work, such as a welding machine and a plasma cutter for them to utilize to do their job. But to elevate the constraint, we add additional people.
How many shifts are you working on the constraint?
3 shifts.
By the way, have you noticed how is referring all the time to the constraint? He's calling it consistently the strategic constraint. Which means deliberate.
Right.
Okay.
That's the heartbeat of our system. Those 2 areas stays there.
So I guess the question that I'm having is, how do you decide at what level you're going to staff the constraint compared to the market demand? Are you basically tracking the need for your products, and that's how you're setting the level of your constraint, or is it going the other way?
Well, we know basically what's out there as far as the market, and we establish our constraint capacity on what the market dictates. We know how much we can
That's part of the answer. There is another part to his answer. You see, I know it from 87. Okay? We've discussed at 87, all what he's describing now was set with Jeff and Dave. We want to see, can this sustain all of it? All this idea can be sustained for 3 years without a change. Now it's 11 years, so it's nice, okay? The idea was to buffer for small fluctuations. We are going to buffer by the fact that we are promising reliably, and we are going to promise based on how much the constraint is already loaded to firm orders. That's why they don't have to play with it like crazy. Am I right?
Yes, sir. When I say 3 shifts, a constraint, not unit, but 1 employee, the way we schedule our constraint, we have a total of 9 fitters that we schedule. We have 6 on the day shift, 1 on the evening shift, and 2 on the graveyard shift. That's why I stated 3 shifts. But we haven't put additional employees on the off shifts because when we started this years ago, we were only running 2 shifts. And we just recently, a couple of years ago, went to 3 shifts. We had to add capacity in the red lanes and didn't even touch our constraint with additional force until 2 or 3 years ago. So we were able to make some process improvements in our constraints. We put big base plates on these, on the A sections. The poles that we make are telescope. So my boss came to me and said, what can we do to gain some extra capacity in the constraint? Well, we had 1 crane in our large pole area, a tandem crane. And that 1 crane was utilized by all 6 fitters to hang a base plate. So my thoughts were, if we can put jib cranes up at each station, free up the tandem crane, a fitter won't have to wait to hang his base plate. If you buy 6 jib cranes, I'll allow you to elevate the constraint 10%. We bought the jib cranes, we put them up, we elevated the constraint. We had the protective capacity in our subordinate areas in front of the constraint and behind it. All we did was spend, a few $1,000s on jib cranes, and we increased our constraint 10%. We're making money hand over fist.
And you have people cross-trained from other areas that can backfill people, the fitters?
Well, our fitters are the most senior people that we have.
Okay.
And we want to guard against vacations because those gentlemen have anywhere from 3-4 weeks of vacation a year. You multiply that times 6 people, you can see where you can lose time in your constraint. So we do have people that can fill in if a fitter is out on vacation because we don't want the constraint to stop for no reason at all.
I have this impression, and maybe it's wrong, is that basically it's relatively easy to increase your constraint, but the danger of doing it is that you may disrupt a lot of other things. And so you sort of planned the growth rate of the fitters.
What other things may be disrupted, which are the most important? The focus of every worker in the company will be disrupted.
Oh, yes.
That's the problem. And that's why they are so careful.
If you elevate the constraint
And then that
prior to looking at-
reliability that is their key strategic.
Absolutely. Remember in what positions they are. They have lead time, which is measured in days, where their competitors are measured in weeks.
Yes.
Okay? Why to mess around with it? Why to play games with the constraint everywhere, not paying attention that when you move the constraint, the focus of everyone in the company has to change. That's the problem.
Yes. Good. Thank you very much.
In our business, we have a similar thing, and so what we did, where your rework cycle is, the only difference, and obviously we made the mistake, was we put the rework cycle back in front. And we have several processes, and we temper the glass and send it over to be insulated, because we also sell insulated glass. Well, the people that were doing the insulated found the glass was scratched. So what used to happen was it would take a day or two or longer for somebody to say something about that. And then a replacement product was brought back through the whole thing back over there, and it was scratched. So our solution to that was your rework cycle. I mean, obviously, we put it in the wrong place, but we put scratch polishers. We bought them and put them there. So if somebody got a scratched piece of glass, then the person that received it could, if it wasn't too deep, buff it out. Well, what happened to us was we got a whole lot more scratched glass coming because the people back there said, well, shit, we don't have to care. They're going to fix it. How come that isn't happening at your place?
Well, nothing, once it hits the constraint, the product coming to the constraint is good, the small parts, the components, okay? Now, once it leaves the constraint, and just to tell you a little bit about our process, a shaft meets the small parts. The fitters assemble the small parts on the shaft. It could be a bracket, a vang, or whatever, a bolt, nut. Then it goes into the 1493, which is the finish welding process. They weld the small components onto the shaft. The fitters don't have anything to do with the welding process. Only thing they do is tack weld the parts on the pole. Okay? If I understand your process, once you put your rework loop back here, because these people back here can fix that problem, correct? Well, we don't have, pardon me? We thought they could. You felt they could. Well, number one, we don't have that capability. This end of our plant cannot bring this product back. We cannot bring this product back into this end of our plant. Okay?
It's like physically impossible.
It's physically impossible. And, you know, if it was possible, you don't ever want to bring it back past the constraint, because you have a possibility of going back through it. It's already consumed constraint time. You'll kill yourself bringing it back around through the constraint.
Let me answer your question. You don't kiss and hug the people that have scratched. It's true that they are fixing it and not the people who have done the damage. But the information is coming back, and the people who have done the mistake are not kissed and hugged.
Any other questions?
Alan,
Yes, sir.
this has been going on for about 10 years or something like that, and basically it was an implementation of the logistics paradigm and the performance measurement paradigm. And you've grown enormously with just treating it as that. It would seem to me somewhere along the line, purchasing would become the constraint, or if you did design work on your poles and all, engineering would become the constraint, or certainly sales and marketing should have, even with that 18-day lead time. I mean, it looks like you got an infinite demand out there with the competitive edge of lead time. I know Ellie was actively involved on the front end of this and the strategic placement of the constraint as an internal constraint.
But have you used the thinking tools as you've gone along, or has this basic strategy lasted throughout that whole time period? That just amazes me that you hadn't run into policy constraints somewhere.
We use the process in every part of our business.
The thinking process?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Caldwell, our general manager, who's in the audience, went to Valley, Nebraska, our corporate headquarters, and used the process on the engineering staff.
And his boss is also a Jonah. There is two things to talk about in this beautiful presentation, in my eyes at least. One is, to what extent this philosophy is standing against time. To what extent it's robust. And it's not a short-term strategy and you don't look on the long term. For heaven's sake, these are legends advocated by activity-based costing. Look on that and how the growth is going so beautifully. 10 years and it's still ongoing. The profits is going up and so on. All the time the look is on the future. This is unbelievably robust, okay? This is one of the old implementations of drum buffer rope. If you notice, nothing has deteriorated. On the contrary. The second thing which is quite amazing in Valmont is your education was?
I have my minors in business administration and my master's in industrial management.
But you said that you've been a CPA?
No, sir.
No. The VP of Operation of all the division. Where is he, by the way? Here he is. Will you please come here for a second?
Come on up, Lenny.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your profession? What was your job in '86? And what is your job now, and so on?
All right. Back in '86, I was still in cost accounting to some degree, and had just now started to go into more of the controller area. I am a CPA, or I passed the exam. I never really practiced in public life, stayed within private industry. And back in '86, Mr. Wood and I ended up going to a different acquisition that didn't work out within Valmont, and then came back within Valmont. Through different roles within the company, I became the controller of the division of which the Texas plant is a part of. And my role became within TOC was to convince. I'm in the corporate office. I'm in Omaha, and my job was to convince the corporate staff to allow us to be doing what we're doing in Texas and our other 6 operations within North America, and to run our Valley or Omaha-based business the same way. The role I took, I did a lot of the teaching of the classes for the different people, and it was just kind of to spread the word, or the seed, if you will. And then basically the rest of it, we let take care of itself. The numbers took care of themselves. Nobody could argue with what was going on, and everyone was very pleased. Stayed within the accounting ranks until 2 years ago, and this is the part Ellie was really trying to get to. We've had 3 or 4 of our accounting types now who run our operations, or in my case now I'm the vice president of operations, and all the different locations report to me, a dumb, stupid accountant. So that's the part he was really after.
You see, TOC is converting bean counters into useful people.
It's always good to see you, Ellie.
Any more questions? No more questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.